Hello and welcome to ChooseFI. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. And if you're new to the show, welcome to the largest financial independence community in the world. Our show and community have existed for nearly 7 years, and we're so happy you found us. We call ChooseFI the ultimate crowdsourced personal finance show. And the entire point of this podcast is to harness the collective wisdom of our entire community. And what's fun with today's episode is I have my good friend Katie on to help me with our second monthly Roundup episode of the major takeaways we had from the 3 episodes that we published here in August. And what makes this the collective wisdom here is Katie originally found personal finance through ChooseFI. And much more importantly, she's gone on to be one of the most influential voices in personal finance through her website and podcast, Money with Katie. So the two of us went back and listened in great detail to episodes 449, 450, and 451. And we're going to really dive into our major takeaways so we can all consolidate the learnings to truly take action on them. So with that, welcome to ChooseFI. Katie, thank you for joining me. This is going to be so much fun.
Well, thanks for having me back, Brad. I'm really happy to be here, and I actually love the premise of these roundups. I'm so happy you're doing them because you're right. Sometimes we listen to these episodes and we catch these nuggets, but it takes a second for them to really marinate and sink in so we can do something with them. So I'm excited to chat through the gold that was dropped in the last 3 episodes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think it's one of those things we used to, as you well know from the beginning of the podcast, we used to do those Friday roundups.
Yeah.
So we used to publish a Monday episode and then do those takeaways plus some other little odds and ends every Friday. And I feel like that really did consolidate it. But honestly, we went away from them, as you well know. And I think having this monthly roundup is hopefully bringing that back to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as immediate, but maybe having that little bit of extra space might even be more beneficial on some level. Maybe I'm fooling myself here, but nevertheless, I think this will be fun. So yeah, what's going on in your world? We had you on a couple months back, and I think some things have been going down in your life.
A lot of things have happened since we've last chatted on the show. I know we talk, occasionally off the air, but yeah, it's been interesting. I had a pretty exciting book deal come through finally.
Ooh,
so that has just been amazing. And actually, what's been really funny is as part of my celebration of that book deal, I kind of broke the cardinal sin of Fi, which is I bought a pretty nice car. A pretty nice car. And it's this car that I've wanted for a long time, right, Brad? But, it always struck me when I was really super deep in the work when I was just getting started and learning about financial independence and untangling all the mistakes I had made so far and going, okay, how do I right this ship? One of the biggest things that I noticed was how expensive it is to own and maintain a car, not just financially, but the amount of time and effort and energy and thought that it takes up in just this concept that I think is really fundamental to Fi philosophy, which is that the more you own, the more owns you. And so I was really thrilled about this car purchase. It's a Porsche Macan. So I was like, okay, this is going to be a really big deal for me. It is literally the cheapest Porsche you can buy, but it's still a Porsche. So I stand by it. And Brad, not 8 weeks after I took possession of this vehicle, is it back in the shop because something has gone wrong. An axle on the driver's side cracked. And so it's all under warranty. It's all CPO. So it's not going to cost me any money. But the amount of anxiety I felt hearing the noise and, okay, something is wrong. Okay, now I have to spend the time today to get someone from the service department on the phone and convince them to let me bring it in and then go sit at the dealership. It's like, okay, it's amazing to be able to treat yourself, but there's nothing in life that's just straight good or bad. Even this super exciting thing is reminding me of why I sold my car several years ago and how nice it is sometimes to be free of the burden of nice things.
Wow, holy cow. There's a lot there. There's so much there.
You're like, where to start?
Yeah, I have 7 different thoughts all at once. Well, first, that's really cool.
Thank you.
Congrats. Obviously, you wanted this car on a deep level or you wouldn't have made the decision.
That's correct.
And I know you said kind of jokingly that you broke the Cardinal Rule of Fi.
Yeah.
But I think that was the old caricature of the Cardinal Rule of Fi, right? And I think that's the beautiful thing about what I think is the new definition of Fi is we buy based on what we value.
Yep.
Right? And if you're in a place where A, you can swing that financially, and B, you value that car, well, make the decision. That's wonderful. You should be really, really happy for yourself and really proud of yourself. It's awesome.
And I love that you framed that way, because I kind of said the same thing I was talking to my dad about it. We both have always loved cars. It's something that we bonded over when I was growing up. And you're right. It is kind of the old definition. It's that there are good values and bad values. Yes, depending on what you value. But if you value, well, that's a bad sign, right? You shouldn't value cars. But I think some people just genuinely do. And then there are things that I don't value that I have peers that do, like clothes. I don't care about clothes. I never buy new clothes. It doesn't matter to me. So I think that there are no such thing as like the right or wrong value, but it was just I was like, wow, okay, that's the German engineering coming home to roost. I get 8 good weeks and then we're right in the shop. So it was kind of a ha moment. But yes, overall, it's been a very exciting and like gratifying experience to be able to do that.
Yeah, and that is kind of the funny caricature of the supposed sports cars and luxury cars.
It's high maintenance, baby.
Oh man, yeah, constantly in the shop. But you said something about essentially the things that you buy, they find a way of somehow owning you, and also then, and obviously I'm paraphrasing that terribly, but the stress of owning nice things. Yeah. Also, like I've always said, I don't want a nice car because I don't want to be worried about somebody scratching the thing, or am I going to get a little fender bender? And I mean, I just don't want to attach my sanity in essence to a thing, right? And what's funny is, as we're recording this the week before it comes out, I just sent out my Fi weekly newsletter, which everybody hopefully should know, ChooseFI.com/subscribe. You can always get on the newsletter, about an article on the website Psychology Today and the neuroscience behind the connection between a clean room and a clear mind. And I have for many years said, I'm like this minimalist at heart. I would love to own essentially nothing. Yeah. And I've always wondered why. And the conclusion was actually really interesting. Cleaning your home or surroundings isn't just a physical process, but a mental one as well. Reducing clutter minimizes distractions, allowing your brain to concentrate on more important tasks at hand. The act of organizing your space can also provide a sense of control and order, which can alleviate feelings of stress and promote a sense of well-being. The mental rejuvenation that comes from decluttering is a clear evidence of the link between our physical surroundings and cognitive function. And Katie, I just thought that was like so wonderful and appropriate. And it was like, it almost vindicated like everything I've thought in my brain for so long.
Totally. I was going to say, that's exactly the word that came to mind. It's deeply resonant. I think both the physical clutter and in a similar vein, I've read in a PWL Capital study about finding and funding a good life, a very similar finding, but about noise clutter, and how if you're in a noisy environment, that causes subconscious stress, because in a very similar fashion, it's your brain having to divert energy to be processing and assessing all the things around you that then you're obviously not able to command and use on a conscious level to focus on the things that you want to be focusing on. So I've always been the fan of the clean room, the tidy space. Like you, if I'm stressed, I just start throwing things away. I'm like, don't need that. That stack of paper is old. Don't want this book. Donate that. And I think that that's totally what's happening, is you're manifesting the feeling you want in the brain around you in your space.
Yes. If my daughters were here listening to you talk, they would be laughing because they know I go on rampages of like wanting to throw every single thing out in the house. I'm like, we have 20,000 items that we could throw out tomorrow. Oh my God. Yeah. So luckily I try to restrain myself a little bit, but
it's like, only throw away your stuff, Brad, not your children's.
Yes. Keep it under control. But yeah, just the last word on this is the noise. One of the best purchases, kind of splurges, albeit a fairly small one, that I've made were my Bose noise canceling headphones. Those have helped me more than anything. I'm reading a book on decluttering and minimalism, actually, and one of their tests was, would you purchase this again if you lost it or if it broke?
I like that test.
Isn't that cool? Isn't that a great starting point?
What's the book?
So it's actually called Goodbye Things, The New Japanese Minimalism by Fumio Sasaki. Katie, this book is awesome. It's like such a quick read. And actually, it's funny because Ginger, who has been on our show a number of times, did the last roundup with me. She's the one who recommended this. So this is a great book. And yeah, just an interesting test. So clearly for me, the vast majority of the things that I own would not pass that test, but those Bose noise canceling headphones would pass with flying colors. I would buy it tomorrow if it broke. So for what it's worth, I think it's something about that. Yeah, that ambient noise, the anxiety. It's just all kind of there.
Yeah, I think it's funny how certain purchases like that can really help us shape our environments to almost get the best out of ourselves. And what I thought was really interesting about episode 449, there were so many quotes that I was like jotting down as I was listening. There was something he said, like, how am I holding me back from being the best version of me? And I was like, whoa, because one thing that immediately came to mind that I've been marinating a lot on recently is what am I doing that's holding myself back? Where am I complicit in the circumstances that I am claiming that I don't want in my life? And Brad, when I called you last week, we were having a conversation about what it's like to be constantly attuned to these things and trying to always up level, trying to grow a business, trying to continue to progress in your journey no matter, where you are. And you had just kind of offhandedly mentioned like, oh yeah, radical accountability. And I was like, yeah, radical accountability.
Yeah.
Where are things totally within my control? Or where is there maybe a more creative solution that I've kind of written off as like not even being an option, or that I've resigned myself to, well, I'm not going to be able to do XYZ because this is in my way. And I just thought that was so interesting about his story and how he was so focused on that very clear goal of like, where am I holding myself back? And how can I keep coming back to that question?
Yeah, JT really had a lot of deep insight into his own psychology, really. And that was extremely fascinating to me. And I had another one that I guess was tangentially related here, which is he was talking about different spots in life. And it's hard to know if, quote, this is the top end of my capabilities.
Mm,
And he said that was the summit at the time, but there are other summits. And
yes.
right. And finished with, are you pushing yourself because that's what makes you happy, or because you're not satisfied with everything in life?
And you know what I love? I love that you go, so what's the danger of continuing to move the goalpost? Because I was like,
Yeah.
yes, this is what I'm here for, Brad. I need to listen to you guys unpack this because I think that is spot on, right? Like the way that he described his journey to Fi and how he had this 100,000 per year goal. And then he got there and he was like, well, what if I could do this? And it almost becomes this ego thing. And he was talking about how the numbers and the math, like that's what motivated me, but that's not what I wanted. And I was like, that resonates so much with me. And how many times have I in my own life felt like as soon as I reach a goal, I just go ahead and move the goalpost because it's not really about the goal. It's that, are you actually taking the step back to ask yourself, what do I actually want out of this situation? What am I really working so hard for? And there was an interesting course that I did oh my gosh, it was like 2 years ago now in 2021, where we were doing this. It was called like an online MBA for creative
Okay.
entrepreneurs. And one of the exercises they had us do was talk about our revenue goals. And I don't remember exactly how much we were doing at the time, but I basically went in confidently and I'm like, well, my goal is 2 times as much as whatever we're doing now. I want to make twice as much as we are now. And everyone in the group was kind of like, okay, why is that? Is it because like you want to live a different lifestyle? Is it because you think that you can reach more people with it? And it was kind of like, well, no, it's just twice as much. That's got to be better, right? It's got to be twice as good. That's what entrepreneurs do, right? They just keep growing until they can't anymore, question mark. And one of the women in the group was like, what if instead of making that the goal, you just made it a goal to earn the same amount that you are now, but in half the time? How would that shift your approach? And I was like, whoa, that's such a good point. I'd never thought about that. Like, there are other toggles that you can play with here, but I just think that that evolution of financial independence and how it can start in our lives as this very compelling force pulling us forward, how it's that idea of, like he said, playing until it's no longer fun.
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
that that was really powerful, and just always revisiting, okay, am I still like on track to what I actually want, or have I like lost sight of like the bigger picture here?
Yeah. I'm curious with your background, obviously as a longtime member of the Phi community,
Mhm.
when that woman in the course said that to you, was that like an aha moment? Because obviously with the background of Phi, a lot of us are looking to reclaim our time.
Right.
But yet your reflexive answer was just, I want to make twice as much. Right. Because
Yeah.
again, like as you said, kind of half jokingly, like making twice as much has to be twice as good, right? But yet so many of us crave actually what arguably, and I think deservedly, is more important, which is our time, control over our time. And I think you mentioned we had a call last week, And we were kind of both bemoaning that it's sometimes, even with freedom and flexibility and assets and income, it still sometimes is difficult to have control over your time. So wouldn't it be interesting to reorient around that as opposed to just the number of dollars coming in, basically?
You know what's so crazy is that I think that was such a clear goal of mine when I started, and time was such an obvious end point. Like, that was what I was so hell bent on regaining, especially because I was working 9 to 5 in an office 5 days a week at that point. So the money was truly a means to an end. But I think I lost sight along the way. It became more about the money, where like I kind of forgot, oh, wait a second. The point wasn't to accumulate as much money as possible. The point was just to get the money that I needed to like live the lifestyle I wanted to live. And to your point, and I think it connected a little bit to the conversation with Jillian in 451, she's describing how, or you guys were kind of sharing anecdotes about going to like an amusement park on vacation, and you
Yeah.
basically just go way too hard. Like, you have this 12-hour day because you're like, oh God, I got to wring as much value out of this as possible because I only have this one vacation and we got to make the most of it. And then you get home from the vacation and it's like, oh, I need a break from that break. And what I was sitting there reflecting on as y'all were telling that story is, you can't vacation your way out of a life that inherently burns you out. And to me, the value of those longer periods away, of the sabbatical model, is that it gives you the time and space to ask yourself those deeper questions, and you almost have nowhere to hide from the answers. I think that people that are go-getters, high achievers, people that are gonna reach 5 decades early, I think you had even alluded to this in that episode. These are not typically the people that are like, man, can't wait to sit on my ass and drink umbrella drinks for the next 30, 40 years. Like, that's not really the personality type that this community tends to attract. And so I think that there is a temptation to kind of be as busy as possible, or to always be striving, always to be reaching. And there was something very honest and very scary almost about the idea of taking a few months off to really reflect on where you are, what you want. It's a little bit outside the comfort zone, I think, of a lot of people in this community, especially when I think on my own life. It's like, oh, I've made my entire life about work and money. And like, now I don't really have that much else. If you take that away from me, it's like, uh-oh, which, as we know, that's a horrible position to retire into, is not having anything else to focus on or care about or think about. So I think that those two episodes were actually quite complementary for me in that way.
Yeah, that's a brilliant connection, and honestly, I didn't make the connection until right now, but it really is interesting because yeah, I mean, JT is talking about the game, right? As you said,
Yeah.
and he said it became clear in that moment that I actually didn't want to retire because I love the game too much that I just want to keep on playing it until such time as the game is no longer fun. And I think JT personally is self-aware enough to
Hmm.
stop when the game no longer gets fun. But Katie, I wonder how many other people would have the wherewithal to stop at that point, as opposed to just like we're saying, it's easy sometimes to get caught up in the income or get caught up in the status, or
Yeah.
hey, we're playing a game and the scorecard is based on money or based on assets or based on followers or based on fill in the blank, whatever it is in your industry. It sometimes is hard to step off, and I think that is what's so beautiful about what Jillian was talking about with mini retirements. And she was talking about testing out things that are fun.
Yeah.
Because, right, like as you're saying, what else do I have other than work at this point? Even though, Kitty, you were a member of the
I
FI
love
community.
what I do. Like,
Right.
that's why I think it's so funny that he's like, "Oh, I think the game is so fun." I'm like, "JT, same." Like, I also
Yeah.
think the game is super fun. I love what I do. But I do think there's something to be said for multidimensionality in life. I don't have any children, which I think it's a lifestyle that at this point in time, being 28 and not having kids, it's very easy to spend all your time focused on yourself and on your goals, especially if you have that cultural conditioning growing up like I did, which was like, oh, the best thing you can do is study and get A's and get into a good school. And like, everything I feel like I experienced conditioned me to want to achieve. And when the GPA was not there to benchmark myself against, it was like, okay, well, what is the quantifiable metric against which I can assess my worth? And guess what? Money is a pretty useful benchmark for that. So I think that there's untangling that I probably need to do in that arena. And as I will not lie to you, Brad, I was listening to episode 451. I sit back and I push away from the table and I go, do I need to work with Jillian? I'm like, I think I
Yeah.
need to work with her and like have the conversation. And yeah, it's funny. I've had conversations with therapists in the past, and I always joke that it kind of would turn into like business coaching or like executive coaching, and they'd be like, I don't think this is what we should be talking about right now. Like, that's not what we're here for. But I do think that sometimes asking for help and having that counterintuitive realization that, like, yes, it's amazing to be driven. It's amazing to love your work. It's also possible to take those things too far and to inadvertently burn yourself out, particularly if you like what you do, because you're
Right.
probably not going to be very apt to take a step back. And even her comment about they took 6 months off and then they invested in a rental property in that time, and it's like, see what happens. It's like, it's not always like a counterintuitive one-to-one, and it's not that the point of the time off is to go make more money doing something else. But hell, I didn't start Money with Katie until a pandemic. It took a few weeks of not doing anything and being bored all the time to be like, whoa, what if I did this? And it's like, yeah, there's probably a lesson in there about needing time and space to make those types of connections.
Yeah, I think a lot of us really could benefit from that little sabbatical or mini retirement, whatever we want to call it. I know I used to take my Red X months in August, which is
Oh,
essentially,
yeah.
right? Like I'm just putting a big old red X,
Love that.
proverbial, over the month of August on the calendar, and I'm off.
Do you still do that? Well, I
I
mean,
mean,
it's August, so I guess not.
yeah, it's August and no. I mean, unfortunately, like, yeah, life intervenes. I think our girls' school got moved up. I mean, you could come up with any excuse, right? But like our girls' school got moved up a couple weeks.
Radical
So
accountability, Brad.
radical economy. Yeah, I know. I know. Believe me. It's I'm well aware this is all in my
I'm just
control.
kidding.
But yeah, I mean, I still haven't changed it. And it's easy to come up with excuses, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think also something that Jillian said in the episode, which also kind of ties into what you're saying about like following passions and being interesting and learning new things. Like her husband went back to school to take some auto mechanic classes. And she
Mm-hmm.
said, it's easy to deprioritize your own dreams as we get older and prioritize our kids. And I do, obviously, I think on many levels, my most important job is being a dad, but it's also easy to get lost in that job,
Mm.
right? And completely deprioritize you. And, it's funny, like, this is such a silly, silly anecdote, but yet it's important enough that it's been on my mind. Is
Yeah.
I have been a soccer fan for my entire life. I've played my whole life. And I used to watch like the English Premier League before it was cool, like in the 90s here.
Oh
Like
my
you had to go
gosh, I
out of your
didn't know
way.
that.
Yeah, it was wild. Like, so, I mean, I used to follow like crazy. And when my older daughter was born 15 years ago, I basically stopped playing, or right around that time. But more importantly, stopped watching every Saturday morning. I would watch the English Premier League. I haven't done that, Katie, in 15 years. 15 years. This was like a major part of my life, and I just stopped because it seemed excessive, or it seemed,
It's
I
like
don't know,
too
over.
indulgent.
Yeah, indulgent is the perfect word. It seemed indulgent to take 2 hours to watch a match, maybe four if I was feeling real good that day, to watch two matches. And this last weekend, it was the first week of the new season. And I'm like, you know what? I've got this Peacock app, and they've got a game on. I'm going to sit down and watch a half.
Good for
And it was
you.
fantastic. It was just awesome.
Oh, good for you. I love that. What a great, gosh, I like, listening to that, I'm like, I wonder what I've lost. Not
Yeah,
even through the process of becoming a parent, but just through the process of becoming an adult.
yeah,
You think about how much time you spend as an adolescent getting to try new things and experiment. There's almost this idea that, like, there's a lot of plasticity in that part of your life where you're encouraged to adventure and try new things. But then there's almost this implicit or explicit expectation that after a certain age, you kind of have it figured out and you're driving down a certain path. But it's really cool to hear you identify something like that and then actually take the time and kind of put your money where your mouth is and be like, no, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch a half of soccer. That's very inspiring to me because you're right. Things like that feel indulgent. It's so easy to make excuses for like why we don't have the time or something more productive we should or could be doing. And I think especially if you're like trying to make financial progress, it's like, oh, well, I should be working on a side hustle or I should be doing something else. But I think that that's really powerful. And switching gears a little bit, another thing that JT said that I thought was really amazing, that I was like, snapping my fingers in agreement. I was like, yes, man, I concur. He talked about mastering your financials first and that you need to get the systems and habits in place first, kind of point blank, before you can start going off and kind of doing what I would call like the sexier, exciting stuff. And, obviously he talked a lot in that episode about land as an asset class and this idea of like, oh, I like was tricked into starting a business. This is not passive income. This is a business with which you have to apply a lot of strategy and use all these different data aggregators and public databases. And, you're doing all this direct mail, what have you. But I just loved that he kind of hit on this idea that like almost none of the extra income that you're going to be able to create for yourself matters unless you have the systems in place. And that's something that I've always really tried to drive home in my own work is that I am so thankful that I had the foundation, both from ChooseFI, from Mr. Money Mustache, from Mad Fientist. I had the foundation in place. I had my systems worked out, my auto transfers to investing, my budgeting guidelines, all the best practices locked in, so that by the time I started like earning more money and had really figured out that piece of the equation, that shovel was just getting bigger and bigger, and it was not sifting through my fingers like sand. And I thought that was, I don't think that this audience necessarily needs to hear that message hammered home, but I was like, just the general populace I think does, because I think that there's a tendency to believe that as I make more money, that's when I'm going to get it together. Like once I earn more income, then I'm going to start making better financial decisions. But I think it's really important to, at every chance we get, dispel that myth, because that's not what happens. Like 9 times out of 10, the money is just a magnifier for your existing habits. You're not going to magically get good with money just because your income goes up.
Yeah, and it's funny because just the through line here of all these 3 episodes, actually, because we haven't talked about 450,
Oh,
which
you're
obviously we're going to,
right.
right? Which
Masterful segue. I wasn't even trying to do that one.
Bill was saying, and I mean, he obviously had a significant income as a physician. His wife,
Yep.
he mentioned in passing very quickly, was a physician, but he said we spent first and we saved last. That was just their MO. That's how they went through what sounds like 15 plus years of their adult earning years. It was YOLO.
Didn't you love the YOLO boat?
Yeah.
I
Oh my
thought the
God. I
YOLO
laughed.
boat was like, oh, chef's kiss. Yeah, he called them the silent majority. That higher earner trap of lifestyle inflation. And hello, I at the top of this episode was like, I bought a Porsche. So like, I can point it. I'm a perfect example, but I do feel like, fortunately, because of all the progress I had made, I was like, oh, I can afford this. Like, this is actually fine. But I think that that high income trap, and you're right, it's like, it blows my mind every time I hear stories like that, because I just was so fortunate to like discover this message so young. And when they were like, yeah, it sucks when you like hear these 20 and 30-year-olds that like they got lucky, right? We just got lucky that the podcast app or some person was like, hey, you should listen to this, and it changes your whole life. But I did think it was funny when you were like, oh, what if I did a 30 or 35% save rate in lieu of 50%, finding that balance, what have you. Because when we did an episode on the Money with Katie show about the ideal savings rate being, we basically were like, I think it's 40%. We looked at like where you start to hit diminishing returns, where each incremental 5% bump in savings has a less and less of an impact on the time that it's shaving off the timeline. And right around 40% is where it's like, yeah, you're going to get incremental time savings with each incremental 5% bump, but they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller progressively. So the fact that you kind of just intuitively honed in on 35%, I was like, it's kind of funny. I wonder if he had any quantitative basis for that number, if he was just throwing it out there.
No, I wish I could say there was some genius behind it, but no, it was made up. And I did listen to that episode when it came out, but that was a couple of months ago. So maybe it's internalized in my head at this point. I
implanted that save rate in your brain.
Yeah, you well might have. But it's funny. You're talking a couple of minutes ago about essentially laying the groundwork. That if you wait until you're making a lot of money, to whatever it is, to automate, to start saving, to prioritize, it's too late at that point. And I think that also ties in again to Jillian's episode where she was talking about really finding things you love. And we were saying that there's such a high failure rate, which sounds crazy, but there's a high failure rate at trying new things. And she said, and that's okay, but it's so easy to get discouraged. So if you wait, and this is the tie in, if you wait to figure out what actually lights you up about life until you hit that FI number on a screen, your FI, I almost guarantee you, is going to be pretty miserable because you're going to
Mhm.
feel like a failure because you're going to try these things that you always said in your brain you wanted to do. Like I use the RV or boating around the world as examples. And you might find out you absolutely hate being on a boat. You get seasick
Yeah.
within 30 minutes, right? Like, and you never tested it. You never tested it, but yet it was this grand dream. And Jillian's quote, and it's a long one, is, but it's worth reading. Mini retirements are great because they let you test out 2 or 3 or 4 things. And out of those 4, you may find 2 that you love. And then you carry that over to the next test and you experiment with 4 more and you find 2 more that you love. So when you eventually become FI, you have 15 things that you really enjoy and you're really good at. And it makes that transition of FI so much smoother.
Mhm.
And Katie, I just thought that was brilliant and like ties in again almost both to the lifestyle and as we're saying the money side of like you have to plant these seeds way before you think you need them in some sense.
That's such a good point. Man, I was just like, wow, what an astute observation when she was talking about how I just could imagine the spiral she was describing. I was like, wow, I feel like I've like lived that in some way where, you have all these grand visions, you're like, this is what I'm going to do. And then it's not what you expected. And you're like, oh my gosh, not only am I not having fun and am I bad at being retired, but I'm also not making any money. Like I should just go back to making money. I was good at that. I was good at accumulating. Like I should just go do that again. And I think that the kind of through line or the overarching thread that connects these and the message that I'm kind of receiving loud and clear at this point, now that we've chewed on it a little bit, is that I think we often wait. I'll speak for myself. I'll wait for that permission or think, oh, well, these things have to happen first. I have to earn that leisure, or I have to wait until the business is at this point in order to start behaving in this way. And I think that there's something so freeing actually about being like, no, the best thing you can do is start taking baby steps right now today, even if it feels premature, or even if you have this kind of narrative in your head that you can't start investing until you make this much money, or you can't start outsourcing things in the business until the revenue is at this point, or you can't start carving out time for a hobby until you've, got X net worth and you feel like you've earned it or you've deserved it at this point. And so I think that there's something really powerful about kind of acknowledging that like this is not a dress rehearsal for something that's going to come later. Like you're in the real thing right now. You're in the show right now. You're not practicing. And I think that that's kind of what I've always appreciated actually about ChooseFI is like it is very action oriented and very much about what you can do today to make things better and not necessarily about always deferring that improvement to the future at some time in the future when you've earned it or you've deserved it or you've checked some box that makes it possible.
Yeah, and Katie, it reminds me so that it's not a dress rehearsal. That has been kind of top of mind in my own head because I read the book 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Berkman,
Oh, so
which,
good.
right, it's fantastic. But goodness, like, I mean, I don't think of myself as like old or middle aged, but I mean, I think by any definition, I'm middle aged. I'm 44 at this point, and like, I'm
Mm.
past the 2,000 week mark out of that
Oh,
potential 4,000, and that's, I mean, you talk about not a dress rehearsal, like that's crazy. I mean, that is absolutely astonishingly crazy. And even though I think of myself in my own head as like fairly young, and obviously I'm
yeah.
active and fit, so I mean, I can do things. It's not like,
How old are you on the inside? Like how old do you
yeah.
feel? What age do you feel?
That is such an interesting question. I don't feel any different internally than I did when I was like 25.
Wow. Okay,
Like
I
at
love
all.
that.
Like I
Isn't
keep
that funny?
it's weird. Katie, I keep waiting for like that moment when I'm going to feel grown up in my head or like confident.
Wait, you're telling me in 44 it still hasn't happened? Oh
No chance.
Dude, I think the same thing all the time. Like, whenever anything goes wrong, I'm like, is there an adult in the room?
Yep.
It's like, woman, you're almost 30 years old. You are the adult. You got to figure this out.
Yeah, I don't think it changes. It's weird, or at least it hasn't for me. And I mean, it's not like I'm an incompetent person. I'm relatively competent at
Oh,
things.
super competent.
Well, let's not go too far, but yeah. So that's an interesting question. I'd have to actually think about like precisely what age. But yeah, I don't feel internally different. Yeah, than at some point in my 20s, for what it's worth.
But that's maybe a piece of this, right? That could be a part of this, that like you still kind of have that, like internally, you still identify as that person. But okay, so you're
Yeah.
reading 4,000 weeks and you're realizing, oh my gosh, wait, I'm like past the 2000th week.
Right.
So then what does that do to your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the intersection of that book and Die with Zero, which people are probably
Yeah,
sick of me talking about at this point. But frankly, like that book was a lightning bolt, Die with Zero
for
for me.
sure.
And reading them both in a fairly abbreviated span of time, it definitely sinks in, especially with my daughters. And I mean, there's no way to sugarcoat the fact that a 15-year-old and an almost 12-year-old that I've spent 60 to potentially 80% of the time I'm ever going to spend with them in their entire lives. Like, I can maybe get lucky and they live at home after college or something, yada, yada, yada. But that's just luck. You can't plan for that. So, I mean, Katie, that's crazy. Like, that's a huge amount of time of the percentage of time. So, I need to maximize this. I need to start living for today. And I think that's not that almost is a little overblown saying it that way, because I don't think I've ever truly pushed off enjoyment or happiness or lived for another day. But I talked about in the episode of, hey, maybe if I didn't save 50% and I saved 30, 35%. So obviously this is top of mind. You brought that up just a couple of minutes ago. So maybe I'm kidding myself that I didn't push off for tomorrow, right?
You know what's funny is now that you say this, I actually have a weird memory of listening to an episode from back in the day where I think you were talking about how you had this tendency to like, obviously you love what you do, you love the work that you do, where you'd like find yourself kind of like sitting at the computer for hours or like kind of going off on your own and like, focusing on these things that feel really important. And it's not that you're like, oh, I feel like I have to, but I kind of remember, is this
Yeah.
ringing a bell? This was like years ago where you
That's
would talk
an
about this.
astonishing memory. Because yeah, I've definitely said that. And yeah, that's like the thing that plagued me for years, like with business. And it's funny because you and I are both online business owners, but JT was also talking, right, about running a
Hmm.
business. And right, I mean, we were talking about the rubber ducks, which, in fairness was probably not the greatest title for that episode, but I thought I thought it was appropriate in the sense that like it just shows that like any type of business that you run, like if you thought it was something special because it's an online business, or in JT's case, if you thought it was something special because it's real estate, you're kidding yourself. You have to have systems, as you said. You need to set up boundaries, which is ultimately the question that you asked me. Like, especially in today's day and age when it's so easy to, and the quote from that old episode was, oh, I'm just going to run upstairs and check email.
Yes. No, but I
Uh,
think it's so funny because my husband and I will do the same thing. And we are fortunate that we just moved to a new house. We have so far moved every couple of years for his job. And it kind of gives us, it sounds crazy because I know moving is very stressful, but it almost gives us an opportunity to break old patterns and routines and like establish new ones. And something, a bad pattern and habit that we fell into when we lived in our last house was like my office was upstairs, his was downstairs. We would both on Saturdays just kind of like drift into our own little computer holes and emerge like hours later. And what we were going to do together that day was an afterthought because we would both just be sucked into whatever we were working on. Not that that's necessarily always a bad thing, but I've noticed even since moving here, we have been like, okay, tomorrow morning, where are we hiking? And then,
ooh.
or like, Sunday, what are we doing for dinner? Or what show are we going to go see? And that those have become more of a forethought rather than an afterthought that comes, when we've already given the best of ourselves to whatever we're cranking through. And it's been really nice for our relationship. But I also think that you assume almost when you live with someone that like you're just going to spend a lot of quality time with them by default. But I think it's very easy to get into that like parallel lives trap where like, yeah, you're together, but you're not really together and you're not really prioritizing one another. And that has been a big thing for us. And I thought that's why your commentary about like, I'm just going to run upstairs and like do this thing really quick. And then hours pass and there you go.
Yeah, you try to respond to email, or maybe in your case, go on TikTok and find Taylor Swift, amazing Taylor Swift things too. Huh?
Don't blow my cover here.
Well, no, keep on sharing them. Believe me, I'm very, very happy about it. But it is funny, the limiting beliefs, right? I think that's a large kind of through line of what we're talking about. And Becky said before even finding Dave Ramsey, and she said, we could have had an enjoyable life and still save money at the same time, but we just didn't think we could. Right? And like I underlined, bolded that we didn't think we could. I wonder how many people have that limiting belief that like by definition, to have an enjoyable life, we have to spend money.
For sure.
Right?
Well, I think this was like a corollary to that same point, but there is a bit of this all or nothing trap where I think some people will realistically look at their situations and go, well, there's no way that I could reach financial independence that quickly, so I shouldn't even try. And I think that that all or nothing trap is really dangerous because, as you guys highlighted, okay, yeah, you might not be able to retire tomorrow, but that first 5 or 10,000 in the bank, that can be life changing. Going from having nothing to a few $1,000s can radically change your quality of life. And so, I've had conversations with friends in the past where they've come to me just kind of anecdotally to be like, hey, can you take a look at my numbers? I feel like I could be doing more, but I don't really know. And I'll look at their numbers and I'll be like, oh, yeah, plug it in the Fi calculator. if you can just like bump this up by this much, you can retire in 19 years. Like, hey, you're way closer than you even realize. And they'll say things like, that's so crazy because I always thought retirement was an if, not a when. And so it never felt like it was even worth putting in the work to try for it. And it makes sense. I mean, if you don't think it's in the cards for you, why would you put the effort in? But A, I think it is in the cards for people far more than they realize. And B, even if you are that rare person for whom, okay, yeah, maybe you're 55 and like you're not going to retire early, is there still like quite a bit of progress that could be made that would radically improve your life? Probably.
Yeah, I mean, you are speaking to my soul here. I mean, that is right. Like that's exactly how I describe this. Is there are benefits to Fi for everyone, plain and simple. And we would be kidding ourselves, and this is not the game we play, in saying it's as easy for someone making $30,000 a year as, let's say, Bill, right, who has two physicians' incomes. It's not as easy. So nobody's saying that. But are there benefits? Immense benefits of having, like you said, Katie, a couple $1,000s in the bank when you've been used to living paycheck to paycheck. When you have that first $5,000, like how much less stress do you have? It is night and day.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot even compare those lives. And that's why I think Fi truly is for everyone. Because again, we've tried to throw out the RE nonsense because it's a distraction. It's irrelevant. The RE doesn't mean anything because like what if you found the Fi community? I'm not going to say the fire community, but the Fi community at 45 and you reach financial independence 17 years later. Is that a failure? No, of course, right? Like that's a massive success. Massive. And to your friend's point, I think the greater personal finance world and maybe the mainstream media, and I'm not a vilifier of the mainstream media, but they've done a real disservice by making retirement seem so impossible or nebulous or just there's no target.
Yeah.
And I think that if we've done one thing, and not just ChooseFI, but Fi has done one thing, the single most important thing is to take something that can I ever get to financial freedom or financial independence? Can I ever get to retirement? And having no clue to saying, okay, there is actually a formula. And we can argue around the 4% rule of thumb, as we call it. I don't care about the exact number, but at least it gives you a very close target that's directionally accurate. Okay, my life costs X per year. and I multiply by somewhere between 25 and let's say 33. And that's going to get me
Right.
to a number that's my target. Katie, I actually have a target now, right? As opposed to just, oh, Susie Orman says I need $7 million, $10
$10
million,
million.
and because healthcare is going to be expensive, which healthcare is expensive, but I mean, like she's just fear mongering at that point.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Totally. One thing that I've been thinking about, and I'm glad that you said limiting beliefs, because I think that I've been listening to a lot of podcasts recently with Kat Norton, who runs Miss
Yes.
Excel. And she has such an interesting approach to business where she basically works like 3 hours a day and has totally approached all of this with such a out of the box mentality. And I wonder sometimes if some of the reasons that people are so quick to kind of accept and embrace this, like, oh, it's not even worth trying, it's impossible, well, think about all these reasons why it's going to be really hard, is almost because I know this is going to sound out there, but I do think that like that is a comfort zone in some ways. And if like subconsciously you either don't believe that you deserve that type of life where you're free and where you feel comfortable and where you feel safe and where you can really seek out that freedom, mastery, autonomy, that you are kind of subconsciously seeking out information that's going to confirm that worldview and keep you in that state where I don't want to say you feel comfortable, but in some ways, the status quo is comfortable. It's a known quantity. It's like, yeah, I might be miserable, but like the misery I know is still preferable to whatever else is on the other side of this question mark. And at least with this stuff, like I can have my credit card debt or like I can keep these habits that may not actually be good for me. So I don't know. I have kind of been reflecting on that just because I think that this shows up differently for everybody. But I definitely think that I had my own host of beliefs that I had to unpack when I found FI. And it really felt like taking the handcuffs off a little bit and being like, whoa, there's this whole other world out there. And there are so many ways to do it, which I think is what else this trio of episodes really highlights so beautifully. It's like land investing, not up my alley at all. But is there so much that I can learn from his journey? Absolutely. Like there were still so many things. I was like, ooh, that's interesting. Like, yeah, systematizing this approach, or like, okay, I see what he's doing there. Like there is something to learn from everybody, which I think is really, really cool. And it is, I think, ultimately about this piece that there's no shortcut for, which is what are you optimizing for? What do you actually want?
Totally agree. And yeah, I mean, Jillian was talking about these limiting beliefs, right? And that you need a clear intention for your mini retirement, or you can easily waste it and the time
Mhm.
could get away from you. And she talked about creating a plan for active rest, right? Like what actually nourishes you.
Yeah.
And of course, like the typical kind of cliche ones that come to mind are cliche for a reason: yoga, meditation, walking out in nature, right? Like these are wonderfully nourishing things for many people, but maybe not everyone listening. Like you have to figure out what nourishes you. And it doesn't matter if that's what nourishes me or you, Katie. It's
Yeah.
every person gets lit up in their own way. And I think that again, it's this experimentation. That's what Jillian talked about. You have to experiment.
It reminds me, my friend Caitlin just quit her job and she is starting her own business and she's doing something for the next month that she's calling Burnout Boot Camp. So I saw she made a video about it and I was like, what is Burnout Boot Camp? What are you doing? Give me all the secrets. And she was like, okay, every single day I have this schedule that I have to follow where I like walk to a new coffee shop. I have to find a new place, go get my coffee, get outside first thing. I'm like making myself go to these exercise classes. I'm making myself cook and like make my own food. I have to call a different friend or family member every day and catch up with them. You know, I'm going to journal for at least 15 minutes. So it sounds very like on the surface kind of regimented and overly scheduled, but it kind of reminded me when Jillian was talking about how there is that tendency to let the time slip by. I think that sometimes it's like the difference between type 1 fun and type 2 fun. Type 1 fun is, okay, I have to put some effort in. It might not be fun in the moment. It's more fun after the fact when I look back on it. Or I'm like, oh, I'm really happy I did that. I almost liken it to like going to the gym.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're not in the mood for it, but do you ever leave the gym being like, wow, I really regret that hour? It's like, no, you're like raging with endorphins. You probably feel really proud of yourself. Like, I think there's something to be said for the way that we affirm or reject our own belief systems by just observing our own behavior. And I find that every time I follow through with something that I tell myself I'm going to do, it's like so unbelievably satisfying and fulfilling and just really builds up that internal confidence. But in any case, I think type 1 fun, scheduling your days with type 1 fun. Yeah, maybe calling your mom sounds like, oh man, that sounds like effort. I got to put an energy to that conversation. It's not like type 2 fun, like scrolling TikTok or watching Netflix or laying on the couch and scrolling mindlessly on Reddit that's like feels good in the moment, but you're done and you're like, ugh, what did I really get out of that? So in my mind, Caitlin was scheduling a lot of type 1 fun. I think that that is very nourishing. And I think that even though it could be counterintuitive to schedule it like that, sometimes just freedom without any structure is chaos and kind of has the opposite effect. So I think Burnout Bootcamp is something that a lot of people could probably use. And bonus is that it doesn't really have to cost much money, but like,
That's awesome.
it's probably a pretty effective way to rest.
Yeah, that's wild. I like that. Burnout Bootcamp. So, okay, Caitlin, we're going to.
Yeah, copyright, Caitlin.
Yeah, really. We'll definitely reference her, but that's cool. And yeah, it's interesting as we think about closing here is identities, identity statements, right? You're just talking about, hey, going to the gym. And like I always had that, I'm the type of person that dot, dot, dot. And I think that's a cool exercise. And JT had something about that where I thought it was fascinating, right? Like, how wild was that? He bought an office first, which is insane, first off.
And lost $100,000 and was like, right. It's okay. I'm a rental property investor. I'm a real estate investor.
I am now a real estate investor.
I'm like, hell yeah, JT, own it.
Isn't that amazing? That emboldened him to go forward, that he had this identity statement. I am a real estate investor now. That was wild. And I think a lot of us could do well with coming up with some type of identity statement about ourselves that is affirming something positive, that something we want to be, something we believe, something that when we take an action, like you're saying, going to the gym, well, you can check off like whatever that identity statement is, like I'm a healthy person. I work hard, whatever it is. You could probably have 27 different identity statements or 2,700 different identity statements that you would get a positive check mark when you went to the gym and you didn't really feel like going, right?
Yeah. I'm someone who follows through on my commitments. I'm someone who prioritizes my health. I'm someone who can do hard things. Take your pick. But I agree. And I think a lot of people, I'm going to go out on a limb. I think a lot of people will write this kind of stuff off as being woo-woo or touchy-feely. I think there is no bigger missed opportunity in money and business than focusing on the energetics and the psychology and the mindset, because it's not everything, but it's probably half the battle. And so I always would feel skeptical myself and be like, oh, there's no way. But it's not really until you start embracing some of these things that you start to see, oh yeah, I'm kind of just living out the narrative that I'm telling myself. Like there are stories that I have about me that my behavior is confirming, and that's probably not a coincidence. Like you got to switch the story before you can change the behavior.
Totally agree. And yeah, I agree also in the sense that it does sound woo-woo when you first hear about it. And I think some of us kind of recovering type A's might be like, oh, how could that be? But then you think of just how powerful our brains are. They're astonishingly powerful. And the reticular activating system of essentially confirming or trying to find things, like it's the old, I'm sure you've probably seen 100 Porsches now that you have one. Right.
Yeah,
and it's
totally.
There's something to that.
And I'm always trying to make eye contact with the driver. Like, hey, look, I'm in the club with you now.
I'm one of us.
I'm one of us.
But right, like once you start focusing on that energy, you realize, okay, our brains are exceedingly powerful.
Yes.
And if I can come up with a positive story or a negative story, there's a reasonable chance that my brain is going to try to find confirming evidence.
Yes.
So why would I not pick the positive story to confirm? The empowering one. It's illogical, just from like a strategic, logical perspective. We're talking about woo-woo. If you want to just break this down to logic and strategy, that's the better strategy. It's not a better strategy to be negative and cynical.
Yeah.
It's not at all. You might think you sound smart, but you frankly don't. And it's just a terrible mindset. So yeah, this identity thing and just coming up with a positive mindset, like it really matters. And listen, it's hard. I mean, you ask my family, there are many days where I'm a moody, annoying person. Like this is not like sunshine and rainbows and unicorns all day. But I think you have to try to be directionally accurate and try to live up to that ideal of a life that you want to live. I mean, we're all trying. And like you said, Katie, this is not a dress rehearsal.
Absolutely.
And Katie, I want to really thank you for coming on this episode. This was so much fun. I can't even tell you.
Oh, thanks for having me. I know I really enjoyed that. I felt like I had FI homework. I was like, all right, let me make sure that I'm really being an active listener to these episodes so I can take away some nuggets. But y'all always make it so easy. Yeah, and if anyone listening is looking for another money show, we do put out a new episode every single Wednesday of the Money with Katie show. We like to take a bit of an investigative journalism approach to our content. And on Mondays, we have a segment called Rich Girl Roundup, which basically answers more straightforwardly personal finance questions and discussions with me and my executive producer, Henna. So if you like podcasts, the Money with Katie show is one that I would definitely encourage you to check out for self-serving reasons, as well as I think you're going to like it.
Yeah. And I will second that. The show's fantastic. Obviously,
Oh, thank
people
you,
are
Brad.
listening to you here. They know how interesting you are. So I don't think we need to sell them too hard on it. But like I said in the intro, and this was not hyperbole, you really have become one of the most influential voices in personal finance.
Oh,
And it's
thank you.
because you do a great job. You're interesting
Thank
and you
you.
do your homework and you ask great questions. It's just all these things, right? So thank you again for being on. And hopefully we can do this in the future.
Yeah, well, I learned from the best.
Very, very kind. All right. Until next time.